Welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast, Episode 10.
You're listening to the Cash Car Convert Podcast with James Kinson.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cash Car Convert Podcast. My name is James Kinson and I am the Cash Car Convert. This is the podcast where cash cars are cool and auto debt is dangerous to your financial future. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about underwater car loans. We're going to be talking about what they are, how people find themselves in this position, and what some of the options are out there to deal with it if you do find yourself with an underwater car loan. The reason I decided to cover this topic today is that first, I've had a few people that I've spoken with over the last few weeks ask me or discuss with me the fact that they had underwater car loans. Number two, I received an email from a gentleman asking about an underwater car loan situation, and I'll talk about that a bit later in the podcast. Lastly, and this was the most surprising thing to me, is I was out looking at my Google Analytics, and that's a way to go out and look at your website and see what kind of traffic's coming to your site and what people are doing there and so forth. And when I went out and looked, I found something that was kind of surprising to me, and that is the number one search criteria bringing people to my site is in fact underwater car loans. And I found this really shocking because I've only written one article on the subject. So evidently there's a lot of people out there who have a lot of questions about underwater car loans and they're doing a lot of searches around it. So I decided to record this podcast. So let me kick this one off by talking about the email that I received from a listener. This week I received an email from a gentleman who is in a really bad situation. He is got a car that's worth $8,000 and his loan value is $18,000. So he's looking at another 48 months with payments of $454 a month, and he's got an interest rate of $14,000. Now, he didn't give me any details about how he got into this position, whether he rolled additional, financing into it or what happened. When you've got that much of an upside down situation or an underwater situation, there's not a lot of options. So I felt really bad for him because I didn't feel like there were a lot of good options for him. And I remember being in debt and having those feelings of being trapped and not being able to look and see a way out. So I wanted to do this episode to try and help those people who maybe aren't in such a bad position, to let them know what kind of options they have and what they can do to try and get themselves either out of the situation or survive it. So let's start by talking about what an underwater car loan is and how people get in that position. So to start, you may hear it called different things. I'm going to refer to it in this podcast as an underwater, but you may hear somebody else calling it an upside down loan or somebody having negative equity, and that all means the same thing. And what it basically means is that you owe more for something than that something is worth. And in this case, we're talking about cars. So let's use an example where somebody owes $20,000 on a car that's worth $18,000. And that would mean you'd have negative equity or be underwater $2,000 on that particular loan. So what ultimately this means is that you are a little stuck, because if you don't have $2,000, you can't really sell your car no matter how much you want to, because you have to be able to cover that gap. And that's where the crux of the problem lies. You might be asking, how does this happen? How does somebody find themselves in an underwater situation? Well, let me just tell you, it's not as tough as it sounds. I've never been in that situation myself, but it turns out in this day and age, it's not that difficult. And here's why. Since 2009, the average cost of a new car has gone from $28,000 up to $31,000 in 2013. And in that same time period, median income went from $54,500 in 2009 to $52,100 in 2013. So what that means is that between 2009 and today, the median income fell 5% roughly, while new car prices went up nearly 11%. Now, these numbers created a problem for the auto industry, the lending industry, and consumers who wanted to buy a new car. So that problem is, how can more expensive cars be sold to people with less money? The answer is by lengthening the loan term for new car financing. By doing this, it'll keep new car payments from going beyond the buyer's ability to pay. And for those people out there who believe they'll always have a car payment, then they tend to focus on the car payment as the sole definition of affordability. Therefore, if I can afford the car payment, I can afford the car. That's the mantra. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, 17% of all new car loans in the first quarter of 2013 were between 73 and 84 months. Compare this to 2009 when only 11% of loans fell into this category. The result is we've got more people financing larger amounts of money over longer periods of time, and therefore we wind up with people with underwater loans. The other point to bring up there is that even with our low interest rates today, and with 10% down, Consumer Report found that it can take 2 years or more to begin building equity in a new car. So think about that. You've bought a new car, you've put 10% down, which isn't a lot, I'll grant you, but for a $31,000 car, somebody's putting down $3,100, and yet they're going to be probably up to 2 years away from breaking even on that car and starting to build equity. So they start off underwater, and they're underwater for the first couple of years. And that's not so bad if you're happy with the car and you plan to keep it for 5, 6, 10 years. But if during those first 2 years you have some kind of a major life event, a death, an illness, a divorce, somebody loses their job, then all of a sudden having a car that's underwater and not having the ability to sell it because you don't have the money to pay the difference between what you owe on it and what it's worth can be a major problem. There's another little wrinkle into all this as well, and that is that most of these extended length loans are being purchased or being taken out by people with subprime credit. The latest information I could find on this was back in 2011. Consumer Reports said that 38% of used cars and 13% of new cars are purchased by subprime borrowers. Another little interesting wrinkle into all this is that the loan-to-value ratio for these subprime borrowers currently stands at 114.5%. Now, what that means is that these borrowers owe 14.5% on average more than their car is worth. So again, we're talking subprime, and they owe 14.5% more than their car is worth. Now, I've talked a lot about new cars here. You can certainly have an underwater situation with a used car as well. So I don't want to give the thought that that's not the case. The reason that's a little more difficult is that new cars lose so much value in those first couple of years that if you buy a car that's a couple of years old, you've got a much better chance of getting yourself in a situation where you have equity in that vehicle and that you're not underwater. Another way that underwater car loans can be created is by rolling negative equity from a previous car purchase into your current car purchase. And this happens more often than not when people are trading up. So when somebody has a car and it's a few years old and they decide to buy a new car and they're in a negative equity position, they just roll that debt into their new car. So I've kind of discussed what underwater loans are. I've talked about how you can find yourself in that situation and what kind of borrowers tend to find themselves in that situation. Let me go through a couple of options that people have here once they find themselves in this situation. Option number one, keep making the payments. If you are capable of doing it, you have the money in hand, keep making the payments. And this is the simplest thing to do. If you can afford to do it, do that. At some point, you'll get to a positive equity position. And if you own the car long enough that you can get the loan paid off, then you will then be driving a cash car, which is where I want you to be. And if you can get to that place, then you can start using those car payments you were making to start saving for your next cash car. And you may get off the car payment merry-go-round. So that's one option, option number one. Option number two is to take out a personal loan for the difference between what your car is worth and what the loan value is. Now, this one, for many people, it seems a little painful to be paying for a car that you're no longer driving. But the fact of the matter is, it is an option for some people. And what you can do is, first I would try going to the finance company who has the car today and talk to them about the ability to take out a personal loan and sell the underwater car. And they may be willing to do that and finance out a personal loan for you. The second option is to go to your credit union or your own personal bank and secure a personal loan for the difference between your car's value and the payoff value. And regardless of which option you choose, be sure to secure this agreement before you sell your car, because when the car is sold, the loan will have to be paid off. So you have to secure this personal loan ahead of actually selling the car. I guess the other thing I'm going to say here is that I do recommend selling the car yourself if you can. You will get more money for it, typically 15 to 25% more than trading in. So I think it may be worth your time and effort to do that. All right, on to number 3. Number 3 is trade in a car and roll your negative equity into your new car loan. Now, what I would prefer to see you do, and I don't have experience with this, so I don't know how easy this is or isn't to do, but I would recommend you trade down instead of trading up. If you can trade down, then what you can do is you can actually reduce the amount of debt that you have. So let's look at a scenario here. I'm just taking these numbers off the top of my head. Let's assume you have a $25,000 loan and your car is worth $23,000. So if you sold the car today, you would owe $2,000 additional dollars. Now let's say that you go to a car dealership and you find a $12,000 car that you like. If you can trade in your existing car for, say, $21,000 and finance the additional $4,000 on the used car that you're buying, then your new car loan would be $16,000 and you'd be driving a car worth $12,000. Now, you might be out there saying, well, wait a minute, I'm still upside down and now I'm even in a worse position. And, on the surface of it, you're right. You're $4,000 underwater on a car that's worth $12,000 as opposed to, $2,000 underwater on a car that's worth $23,000. And what you've done in this scenario is you've eliminated $9,000 of debt. And so this can give you the opportunity potentially to get a payment that's more in line with what you can pay and drive a car that's more in line with what you can afford. This may give you the opportunity to start saving some of that additional money towards getting your first cash car. But again, that's the ultimate goal here. I want to see people driving cash cars so that they will not be faced with underwater car loans or any kind of car loans. I want you to have the margin in your life that when those major life events happen, you're able to ride through the wave on those things. Option number 4, if you can't find any other option, you've tried everything else that can be done, a last option is you can contact your finance company and tell them that you're going to voluntarily turn the car in. It's called a voluntary repossession. And this is another way of getting out from underneath the car loan. Now, this is not a get out of jail free card by any stretch of the imagination. If you do this, it will damage your credit. It'll be on your credit report for years to come. And you'll still be obligated to pay the difference between what the car sells for at auction and the amount that you owed on the loan. Now, if you don't repay this and you don't strike some agreement with the finance company to pay it, they will file a lawsuit on you and you will have a judgment entered against you for that amount that's owed between the auction price and the loan price. So this is really kind of a last resort. If you are just so, if you're just in such a bad position that you cannot make the payments, right? You don't have enough income coming in to make those payments, then this is a last resort option that you can do. And I actually spoke to somebody this week who went through something like this, and he did exactly this. He did a voluntary repossession, turned the car in. He negotiated payments with the creditor for the difference between what the car sold for at auction and what he had originally owed on it. And he paid that off and was able to show that he had done that. And that looks a lot better on a credit report than showing a judgment against you that's unpaid. So he was able to overcome his situation and bounce back after having done this and rebuild his credit. And now he's able to go out and buy cars with credit if he so chooses. I still recommend against that, but that is an option that you have at that point. So let me close by saying this. If you're underwater on your current car, you have my sympathy. While I haven't had this happen to me, I have been in a situation where I needed to sell a car and I couldn't. And I know that feeling trapped and the feeling I had driving that car, it just felt awful. So I know a bit about how you feel there. But I also want you to know that you do have some options. So I've outlined some of those. I'm also going to put additional links in the show notes to other articles that are out there on the web that'll give you some other ideas and thoughts about how you might be able to, make your situation a little less painful than it is. What I really hope, though, is that one or more of these options will help you get out of your underwater car. And if so, it'll be a step in the right direction, a step towards a cash car and getting control of your future finances. If you like this episode, I'm going to ask you to please consider going to iTunes. Once you're on iTunes, you can subscribe, leave a rating and review, and taking that action will help this podcast get noticed and allow more people to hear these episodes and learn the value of driving a cash car and the dangers of auto debt. Also, if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, @CashCarConvert, or you can alternatively reach out to me on email, cashcarconvert@gmail.com. Lastly, do you have a comment about this podcast? If so, please go out to cashcarconvert.com/010 and leave a comment and let me know your thoughts about this particular episode. I just want you to know I appreciate every listener. I thank you so much for listening to the Cash Car Convert podcast. And remember, I want you to buy a cash car and kick auto debt to the curb.
Auto debt is dangerous. Why is that dangerous, Daddy?
Well, Jordan, to get the answer to that, I suggest you listen to the Cash Car Convert podcast or head over to cashcarconvert.com.